From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Rockstar. We'll see Sherry again tomorrow night. Looking forward to a big one tonight. No mucking around. It's all inside the man cave. Now, before we went on holidays, lots of people had a pretty crappy summer in the, north of Australia. Queensland, from Cairns all the way up, there was lots of problems with rain after Tropical Cyclone Jasper. It ended up as just huge amounts of damage, and there are plenty of people in those communities who feel somewhat forgotten because the story always moves on. Just like the people of Lismore from a couple of years ago, the story always moves on. Well, I'm sad to say that there looks like there's about to be another cyclone which could do just as much damage coming in by this time next week to Queensland. This thing could land anywhere between Cooktown and Mackay in terms of the eye of the storm, but obviously the rain could go as far down as Bundy and all the way up back again to Cooktown. So there has been a warning put out by the Bureau of Meteorology today, the bomb, of course, that this thing is likely to land by this time next week. So we're trying to give people as much notice as possible, and here's how it played out today on Sky News Weather.
It's early days in forecasting for a tropical cyclone, but it's now likely to develop as we enter next week, and it's a considerable chance to run all the way to the Queensland coast.
Now, part of the reason that I am leading the show with this tonight is because so often the Bureau gets it wrong. Now, there's a lot more detail that I have to put into this, a lot more research over the next few days. But the Bureau has got it wrong multiple times when it comes to the consequences of heavy rain, about what is going to flood and where. Royal Commissions have shown this, and multiple natural disasters have shown it as well. So if you're somebody who has been affected by the alert system that is supposed to tell you when things are going to be terrible, instead it fails, can you send me an email? paul@skynews.com.au. We'll have more detail on it in a few days' time, but I tell you what, it'll be worth the wait. Now, without doubt, the big story today is, of course, Donald Trump finding the first foot towards becoming the President of America again. But I'm not going to bore you with what you've seen a lot of, because all of those people have been able to cover what has happened thus far. But as you know, the Iowa caucuses. Now, the way that America chooses its president is important to reference to those who maybe aren't fully aware of the system, which is that to become the president, you have to become the nominee of your party. To become the nominee of your party, you need to have over half of the delegates at what is called the nominating convention. Now, delegates are selected by state votes, and those can be done in one of two ways. You have a thing called a primary, which looks like an election we would have in Australia, where you go into a booth, pick your candidate, and then you walk away. The other is a thing called a caucus. Now, the way the system works is that this is a very old school way of voting. It's a way where just a couple of hundred people in a small country town would go to their local, say, school hall and decide to go to different corners of the room to declare whom their candidate is. That's basically what happened today in Iowa. And as you know by now, Donald Trump smashed it. He got more than half of the vote. Because there are so many different school halls across the entire state of Iowa, this number will change over the next couple of days. But to break 50% is extraordinary. To give you an idea of just how extraordinary that is, it is the highest vote ever recorded by a candidate in the Iowa caucuses. George W. Bush, back in 2000, who had a vote in the 40s, was the previous record holder. And this is the biggest margin over their rivals since Bob Dole, Senator Bob Dole from Kansas, way back in 1988. But rather than spend my time talking about will he win the presidency, won't he win the presidency, what's Joe Biden going to say, all the rest of it, basically, the only thing that can stop Trump being the nominee is a court. Now, there's a process that needs to play out. Next week, there's a primary in New Hampshire. About a month after that, there's one in South Carolina. And then you move to Super Tuesday, where a huge number of states will decide their delegates for that convention that I was talking about before. But when you're winning by this margin, it looks like you could wrap it up within one or two of these state primaries. But to give you an idea of just how dominant Donald Trump was, you need to look at the types of people that are voting. Now, Iowa is a very white and very conservative state, but still, have a look at this about how it is Donald Trump's Republican Party. No ifs, no buts, no questions, and there is no way to run to the left or to the right of him, because he won men and he won women. He won the youth vote He won people ages 30 to 44, he won 45 to 64, and he smashed it at 65 plus. He literally won the young vote, the middle-aged vote, and the older vote. He also smashed it with people who had had an education that took you both to college or you never went to college. He also won, in an incredible fashion, this. He won both the people who want to ban abortion across the entire country, and he won the people who don't want to ban abortion. Now, 66% of all Republican voters don't think that Biden won the last election legitimately. Of those people, how many decided to back Trump? Well, as you can see, it was an absolute routing. So if you do not believe that Joe Biden won it fair and square in 2020 in Iowa and most likely everywhere else around the country, because this has been your debate for 4 years, Trump is going to win. However, for those who automatically say smashing it in Iowa means he's going to smash it when eventually he's up against Biden, have a look at this. Just 1/3 of adults who can vote in all of the United States believe that something was crooked about the 2020 election. So while Donald Trump might be winning, 70% of those people, well, 70% of a third is nowhere near the half that you need to actually win in November. But something many people noticed today was that Trump was very polite in an unusual fashion today.
Whether it's Republican or Democrat or liberal or conservative, it would be so nice if we could come together and straighten out the world. I want to congratulate Ron and Nikki for having a good time together. We're all having a good time together. I think they both actually did very well. I really do. I think they both did very well.
Now, I say that a court is the only thing that could stop Donald Trump from becoming the Republican nominee. Now, we will learn in the next couple of weeks whether some decisions which have been made by states like Maine and Colorado, now states that don't vote Republican, but still could be a leader of multiple other states, as to whether Trump is even allowed to be on the ballot. Now, they believe because of what they see as his role in January 6 and insurrection, despite the fact that he has not been charged with any such things, that is a reason for him to be booted off the ballot. Now, in places where he won in 16 but lost in 20, places like Wisconsin or Pennsylvania, if his name was booted off the ballot there, then his chances of getting the requisite 270 electoral votes, remember every single state in America has different value as to the total number of delegates that you need to become the president. If somewhere like Pennsylvania was not able to be won by Donald Trump because his name is not on the list, then there would be no chance of Donald Trump being the president of the United States. Yes, the Republican nominee, yes, in many states, but not in all of the states that he would need to win the presidency. Now, this decision will be made by the Supreme Court because the Trump campaign, rightly, has already appealed the state-based decisions in Colorado and Maine to try to get his name back onto the ballot. But if the Supreme Court says that it's states' rights, just like they have with, say, like things like abortion, well, then it would go back to the 50 different states to decide whether or not his name goes on the ballot. If his name's not on the ballot, then, as I say, his ability to get to 270 electoral votes, well, it evaporates. Now, many people will tell you, including my dear friend Megyn Kelly, who knows the American legal system way better than I, that this will 100% be kicked out as a court case because it's absurd. He hasn't been charged with anything. But again, I say, this is the Supreme Court that decided to send abortion back to states' rights. Multiple times, conservative people's interpretation of the Constitution of the United States is that it's states' rights first, and the national perspective is only really necessary when it comes to things like the defence of your country. So watch this space. The second thing is, of course, the multiple cases that Donald Trump will have to be in front of juries of his peers. Now, these are in places that voted deeply against him in the 2020 and 2016 elections, so the likelihood of him being found guilty and maybe being sent to jail, well, it's pretty likely. Why? Because one of these things is taking place in Washington, D.C. Now, Washington, D.C. is where the conversation around January 6, his involvement in it, will play out before a jury of 12 people who come from a population where basically 9 out of 10, they vote Democrat. They don't vote Republican. That's why Jack Smith, the special prosecutor who has been put in charge of trying to chase down Donald Trump, has decided to go after cases that are in areas where the juries may well end up throwing him in jail. Now, just because he goes into jail does not mean that he can't become the president. Ironically, under the American system, in some states, people who are in jail are able to vote. In some states, they are not. But you are allowed to get yourself onto the ballot, even if you are in jail. And just finally on all of this, an extreme majority of people in Iowa said that they would still vote for Trump even if he was found guilty or even if he was sent to jail. So that's fine in terms of getting to the nomination. There is virtually, bar his name's getting struck off the ballot paper, no way that I think Donald Trump is going to be defeated as the Republican nominee. But does this all mean that Biden gets another free pass to another 4 years in the White House? We'll all wait, we'll all watch, we'll all see. And fingers crossed, no. Now, cost of living, it's our major focus each and every night. Why? Because poll after poll, day after day, people after people tell us it is the number one issue in the country, which is why I'm so relentless in talking about it. 74% of people say that it is their main issue. So now the Prime Minister's out there all day, every day saying cost of living, 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 but he's doing just about as much this year as he did last year, which was 4/5 of bugger all for the extreme majority of Australians, who are the ones that are actually having the problems. But you know how right we are on this issue? Even The Guardian agrees. One of their award-winning columnists, wrote today that if Albanese wants to keep voters on sides, he actually needs to deliver on cost of living. So finally, unity between the Turnbull Times and Turnbull's favourite primetime TV show. Which again is why the Prime Minister is trying to say one thing over and over again, hoping that if he says it enough, you will believe that finally he cares about what you have cared about even before he became Prime Minister.
We're into making a difference each and every day, and that's what my government's focused on. And you'll see in the lead up to the budget, us continuing to make announcements like we are today that make a practical difference.
Now, this is a slight change in tone from where they were, of course, for most of last year, going into the mid-year economic review, including when the Prime Minister used to constantly tell people that it was more important that the federal government had a surplus than using the surplus of money that they have to do anything about helping people with cost of living. But what's different about this year compared to last year? Oh, that's right. There is a spot in the Parliament up for grabs, largely built in and around this issue. The seat of Dunkley, in and around the area of Frankston in Victoria, is of course going to have a by-election. It will have so in late February or into early March. And as I said last night, and I explained to you, this is the most interesting political event that is set to happen at the first half of this year, before we start to have a look at what may well end up happening in the second half of the year. In my view, if the Labor Party ends up winning this seat, there's a chance we could have an election sometime after August this year. But if the Liberal Party wins it, well, then it shows that they are starting to find a way to flip seats, including the seat of Dunkley, which they had in their possession multiple times over multiple cycles. I remember in 2007, in 10 and in 13, this was a Liberal Party seat. Then in 16, 19 and 22, it flipped to Labor. The extreme majority of people in the seat are trying to pay off their homes. In fact, a higher than average, I should say, number of people in this seat are trying to pay off a home loan, which means the elbow dozen of interest rate rises that are all part of the cost of living and inflation picture. Well, people will be very alive to somebody who may well want to send a message or to punish Anthony Albanese. But something that was interesting today the Prime Minister was doing when it comes to cost of living was pretending that he was going to do something about people's power bills. I'll get to all of that in a moment. But again, inflation and cost of living is going to become a major political issue, and we will see what happens in the next little while, particularly going into that Dunkley by-election. Has any bark actually come off the government, as opposed to the bark, not off the tree, but the bark that comes from the dog that's been making a lot of noise on this stuff? Now, yes, very early this year, inflation had fallen to the lowest level in 2 years, but before you start getting too excited, the current inflation rate is 4.3%. Remember, the Reserve Bank says that they will keep rising interest rates until it is somewhere between 2 and 3%. Also, while the average inflation rate is 4.3%, and again, I'm not going to pretend that's a bad thing, I want that number to be as low as possible. But here's the reality for people. While the headlines were saying greatest in 2 years, gas and household fuels were up by 12, almost 13%, followed by electricity, tobacco, bread and cereal, rent, food products, alcohol, dairy, new homes that were being purchased by the people who would live in them, non-alcoholic beverages and such and such. It goes on and on and on. All of that way higher than the 4.3% that, of course, they all get very excited about. As the government is desperately trying to put a gold star on itself for managing the economy, the headline might be okay, but as soon as you scratch the surface, the details are there about what is still too expensive for many people around the country. And by the way, how does Australia compare to the rest of the world? Again, let's just set the table for the conversation. This is the show that, yes, well, there's lots of opinion and lots of bluster. I always try to show you the data. I always try to bring you the receipts. I always try to show you the facts that come from places like the Bureau of Statistics or come from the OECD, which in this case has a look at the inflation rates for lots of countries around the world. And here we go. Australia's 4.3 is higher than the UK, it is higher than the US, it is higher than Canada. All countries that have either similar economies. Yes, New Zealand has a higher rate of inflation, but let's compare ourselves to the UK, the US and Canada. Which is why the Prime Minister today was beginning the rollout process of saying that everything that he does has some angle on cost of living, no matter how small and how insignificant that is to the extreme majority of Australians. The Prime Minister was there with the New South Wales Premier today saying, look at us, we're doing something to put solar panels on public housing, therefore potentially cutting the power bills of people who live in what used to be called Housing Commission. Now,
Anthony Albanese has hinted cost of living help for households could be on its way, but did not give details.
And that's how the media, well, they ate it up. Now, people who live in Housing Commission, they deserve to have lower power bills like everyone else, but let's not pretend that the 30,000 people in New South Wales that will eventually, once you carry the one, cross your fingers, put 2 years together and blow in this direction, is anywhere near the millions of people that are suffering from the power bill increases that we just showed you that feed into the very inflation question that the Reserve Bank still says is too high and means interest rates will continue to rise. Which brings me to another bit of politics. We touched on this last night, but I wanted to bring it a little further into the show so you could see it with your own eyes as well, which is that while the Prime Minister is obsessed with blaming Coles and Woolies and Woolies and Coles and Coles and Woolies and Woolies and Coles and Coles and Woolies and Woolies and Coles, constantly, that is the problem with inflation, those evil buggers who were essential workers during a pandemic. Well, these are the people that are apparently now solely responsible for how much your bills are going up. Not, as we just showed you, what was it? 13% for gas, 10% for electricity, 10% for tobacco, which of course now is mostly taxed to the federal government. Well, as we know, there's great anger. And the Prime Minister is doing all he can to say it as much as possible that it is those damn supermarkets that are the problem. This is the exact same strategy that was used successfully to blame not the federal government but the Reserve Bank for the reason interest rates had to keep going up for the past 12 months or so.
My government is concerned about the price of what consumers pay at Coles and Woolies and other supermarkets.
Our government is focused on the prices that supermarkets charge.
If the supermarkets are buying it cheaper, they should be selling it cheaper too.
Well, interestingly, they've even got an inquiry into all of this. We know that an inquiry is very important because it gives an opportunity for somebody to wave their fingers at the CEOs of Coles and Woolies. Now, by the way, I could not care less for the CEOs of those two companies. I don't know them. I owe them no favours. I have no interest apart from the people who work for them remain happy and they take care of the people who work from them. So I'm not here protecting the supermarkets. I, like you, end up spending too much money in the damn things. Perhaps my reason is because I can't find a bargain. And the person who has been appointed to the latest version of an inquiry into the supermarkets, potentially to use new laws to be able to threaten to break them up like Microsoft in the 90s, is a man who you may well remember, Dr. Craig Emerson. Yes, that Dr. Craig Emerson. Very famous during the Gillard years, stuck around a little bit longer than that. A man who was, of course, well known to the Prime Minister because they were oh so buddyish during their time together in the Parliament. Now, he's got a little bit of form as a person who's got plenty of opinions about supermarkets and supermarkets ripping off. In fact, here's a photo of him in 2009 when he was a minister responsible for prices and consumers and making sure that people pay less for things like oats and breakfast. Well, of course, the scheme that he, in part, had to administer was an idea that was around from old mate Karen Rudd. Remember that idea, which was, of course, Grocery Watch. So we're now, 15 years on from that debacle, but the bloke who was in charge of that debacle has now been brought back to pretend that he has the solutions to the current situation of inflation, which this government is going to pretend has nothing to do with their own taxes, nothing to do with the cost of electricity that those supermarkets actually have to pay to stay open so that your dairy is cold and your meat is edible. No, no, no. The problem is, of course, all of those evil moustache-twirling people sitting around the boards of Coles and Woolies. And I'll have plenty to say about the particular decision-making of Woolies in a moment or two's time. But last night on this program, the great Matt Canavan pointed out that the very person who is now responsible for having a look at supermarkets is the bloke whose previous job was to look into supermarkets.
Craig Emerson's not the man for this role. I'm glad you mentioned Grocery Watch, Paul, because the minister responsible for presiding over the Grocery Watch failure was none other than Dr. Craig Emerson. He was competition minister at the time. They shut down the Grocery Watch website. In fairness to Craig, the guy who started the process was a little man called Chris Bowen. Chris Bowen started Grocery Watch, and Craig Emerson had to come in and get rid of it. Nothing much changes, does it? It's just too funny. Look,
Now, there was no doubt that he was right, but just to double down on it's right, Philip Coorey, before he moved to the Financial Review, used to work for the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. And he wrote about the failure of what became Grocery Watch, one of the great ideas from Karen Rudd. Sorry, Dr. Karen Rudd, Ambassador Karen Rudd. And it reads like this. Grocery Choice was a spin-off of Kevin Rudd's pre-election empathy with voters over cost of living. You mean he's not the first Labor politician to show fake empathy about cost of living, that being the current Prime Minister? A Rudd government could not mandate lower grocery prices, but it would enhance competition, went the mantra. After the election, the website concept began as Grocery Watch. It was a disaster, so the government gave $13 million to Choice to make it happen. Unsurprisingly, they were unable to get all of the information that was up to date. There were lots of asterisks, lots of out-of-date stuff. So instead, the government said, as soon as it realised the information was not going to be up to date and accurate, they decided to pull the pin. The government knew that in the end it would have to wear some of the hate. Chris Bowen had been the minister that had been in charge with trying to set the whole thing up, and it was Craig Emerson who found himself in a position to have to kill it off. He did so by putting out a press release on the same day that Michael Jackson died. You know, to make sure that everyone, while paying attention to something else, wouldn't see what they were actually doing. So good luck, Australia. Cost of living and those evil supermarkets are now in the hands of the bloke who couldn't even get a website right. Oh, but it's a Labor government and it's the media that never remember even what some of them wrote themselves a long time ago. Anyway. One other thing I quickly want to mention here too, which is the number of people who I've spoken to over summer who have asked me my thoughts about the Woolworths situation when it comes to the Australian flag being used in merchandise in and around, tatty stuff. Let's not pretend that, you know, your Australian flag thongs are your prized possession. But as you know, the decision was made by Woolworths that they were not going to sell Australia Day paraphernalia. The flag would not be available, and of course, as both of us know, most of that stuff was made in China, and many of us complained about that over and over again. But I've got to say that the reality is if Woolworths doesn't want to sell it, then it's Woolworths' right not to sell it. But that's not what made me angry. What made me annoyed is the way that they decided to pick up a megaphone and tell everyone that they were doing it, as opposed to softly just not making it available. They don't put out a press release when a certain product is unavailable. Instead, they wanted the gold star from the woke brigade that they had joined the efforts to somehow slowly but surely stop talking about Australia Day. Now, remember, it wasn't that long ago that Woolworths was a prize sponsor of Australia Day. But the Woolworths people, well, they put this statement out about why they weren't going to have the Australia Day merchandise. There's been a gradual decline in demand for our Australia Day merchandise from our stores over recent years. At the same time, there's been a broader discussion about January 26 and what it means to different parts of the country. Now, no one would tell us who had this opinion, just was a spokesperson. We know many people like to use this day as a time to get together, and we offer huge varieties of products to help our customers mark the day as they choose. Now, for those that have turned around and have laughed at, among others, Peter Dutton for saying things like this.
So I think it's an outrage. I think people should boycott Woolworths. I would advise very strongly to take your business elsewhere, to go to IGA or Coles until we get common sense out of a company like Woolworths. I don't think they should be supported by the public.
They are fundamentally misunderstanding what makes people annoyed. On the one hand, yes, there's a small number of people who are particularly annoyed that the crap that's made out of China that is turned into the Australian flag is not available for them to buy from Woolworths on January 26. But the reality of most people's annoyance with what happened here was that the company went out of its way to tell us they were doing it for the right reasons. That, of course, meant that we were being told by yet another company about their stance on our National Day. Now, as I tell you each and every Australia Day, I love Australia Day because I love the story that hundreds of thousands of immigrants sign up to the country. They join the greatest club in the world, and they do so on Australia Day. I see it as a day of renewal. Now, I have long supported the position of Noel Pearson, which is to have 2 public holidays. Why not? Most people are off towards the end of January, which is the 25th, which is about celebrating, commemorating, mourning, or, as I say, celebrate, whichever way you want to look at these things. Indigenous achievement, but also understanding that there was an Australia pre-1770, pre-1788 on January the 26th as well. But then you have a day, the next day, to celebrate the modern Australia that all of us live in right now, including most of the people who bitch and moan, using the technology of modernity to whinge about modernity. But of course they want to have it both ways, which is, can we all have the modernity that is only possible by living in a first world country in 2024? But can we pretend that it's not the country that was the only way it's possible to be this modern? No. Let's still pretend it's 1770. That's why people were pissed off about Woolworths, not because they couldn't get their bogan thongs. More in a sec here on Paul Murray Live, straight into the debate. Looking forward to doing so. For the rest of the show, get ready. Linda Scott, James Morrow, and a whole lot more. In fact, we've got to talk about Sydney City Council and Queen Clover taking flags out of people's offices. Thank you very much for watching. How's this? We're all in the man cave together, which means no satellite delays, and we're all back where we were this time at the end of last year. Linda Scott, councillor from the City of Sydney. I'm going to talk about your Lord Mayor, Queen Clover, and Flaggate in a second. The national political editor, and so much more. Of course, host of the US Report here on Sky News, co-host of The Outsiders, the wonderful James Morrow. Looking fighting fit. Did you get a little bit of a shave, a little bit of a shear over summer?
A little bit of the Shaun the Sheep action here, you know.
Looking good, pal. All right, now we're going to get to this nonsense about the city and the flag stuff in a second. But I just want to, for a second, and I know it's kind of last week's debate, but it's our opportunity to talk about it now. You saw what I had to say a couple of minutes ago, James, about what people don't understand about the Woolies Australia Day stuff conversation. My issue, I don't care what companies choose to do. If they choose to stock something or not stock something, that's their choice, right? There are plenty of websites, and between now and Australia Day, we will promote. Plenty of places where you can buy your bunting or a flag or something that you want for what you want to do on Australia Day. My issue was that rather than just quietly kind of not doing it, they had to announce we're not doing it because they had to get the woke points because this is the next stage in the boxes you must tick in order to be pure.
Well, Paul, I have a bit of an issue with the whole sort of debate, too. Like, yes, okay, it's all bad. And, again, these sort of woke corporates, again, pushing their political agendas. And I'm sure that, not a lot of C-suite executives at Woolworths are going to be having big Australia Day barbecues at their places, on the Lower North Shore on next Friday. But that said, I also think that getting caught up in the weeds about what one company or another does is a mistake. And what we need to be doing, and I think what people who care about Australia and people who care about Australia Day need to be doing, is talking about the much bigger issue about what makes this country great and why it is worth celebrating, and not having this caveated, okay, look, there's some good stuff and some bad stuff, and we're going to talk about both and everything. No. You can have a day where you celebrate. A lot of bad stuff happened in the French Revolution. The French don't have it. Oh, I do not know if we should do Bastille Day because the terror and the guillotine is not so bien, Senor Paul.
Senor, hang on. That's about as sensitive as we've gotten. I'm so glad we're in the wide shot for Linda to have to watch that back time and time again on Channel 2 this year. Okay, when Peter Dutton turned around and he says you should boycott, right? The reason I disagree with the boycotting specifically of Woolworths is because I can guarantee you one thing, Australia, they'll turn a profit this year and then everyone turns around and goes, oh, so much for the boycott. Come on, right? I don't know whether he should have gone there, but equally, Albo thinks that he's up on his high horse and somehow everyone thinks this is just such a nothing issue. He, of course, says that it's all about Peter Dutton fighting culture wars. It all goes back to the central theme, which is to click and drag what they've been able to do, say, with Biden and Trump, which is to say, no matter how bad it is under us, we're not them. Vote for us because we're not them. Again, you're somebody who is well and truly progressive on this issue, does not believe anything of what James and I have just said about the necessity for the day. That's fine. We love a lefty every now and then.
But I think that Peter Dutton needs to explain to the Australian public why he thinks that people should boycott a company that is employing, hundreds of thousands of Australians. Retail jobs are really important. We've got lots of people in these
But what about when lefties say boycott Sky News? We've got employees too.
Well, but the retail sector is an absolutely enormous sector.
Sure.
Right? And I think that it's a very unusual ideological position for Peter Dutton to take as a person who supposedly
So
does
then if Anthony
believe in the
Albanese
free market
successfully breaks up Coles and Woolies, do you think that any of those workers may end up getting sacked as a result of the downsizing that may well happen as a result of the Emerson inquiry? Any chance of that happening?
Paul, you yourself have just highlighted that Woolworths last year made $1.6 billion, Coles made $1 billion. It's a pretty anti-competitive system we have
largely
in
off the sale of their petrol station business, but okay.
When Australians go into the supermarket, and this is what our leaders should be focused on, those prices are super high.
Okay.
And we've seen them
Well, hang on a second.
You can't run a litre of milk through the checkout without noticing how much these
I agree with this. I'm not pretending, but this government's introducing taxation on the trucks that bring in the milk from the dairies.
And Coles and Woolworths are massively lifting up their prices on these kinds of basics that Australians can't afford. This is what we should be talking about, not tiny little flags and thongs that may or may not have an Australian flag on them around the 26th of April.
Okay, well, this is my point, right, which is, and you've seen spin as much as stories in your life, right? It feels like they're trying to do to the supermarkets what they successfully did to the Reserve Bank, which was to pretend that the end of the problem is the problem, not the ingredients to the problem.
Paul, both sides of politics, both, Peter Dutton's office and Anthony Albanese's office are seeing internal polling right now that says everybody hates big corporates. You are completely correct. Groceries are insanely expensive right now. The problem is we've got this duopoly, which is encouraged by government. The solution to that is not to add more regulation into the mix and to make it harder to do business. The solution ultimately is going to be more competition for the sector. I think that's the thing. But I think also when you talk about culture wars, this is this pattern that we get into over and over and over again with things. We saw it with The Voice, we see it with this, we see it with everything. Somebody comes along and wants to change something that's established, like Australia Day, and then so he says, "Hey, no, I don't think so." And they say, "Oh, you're a culture warrior." It's like, well, no, we're just trying to keep Australia Day. Let's just have a day.
Yeah. By the way,
that's not what Peter Dutton's focused on, is it? He's attacking Australian jobs, and he's attacking one particular company who employs thousands and thousands of Australians in order to provoke a culture war. Why would you do that? Why would you not focus on the common good of cost of living
Would you
relief?
agree? Would you not agree then that Woolworths was trying to trigger a culture war by going out of its way to say what it wasn't stocking and why it wasn't stocking?
I think they spoke about things like Australia Day merchandise. You'll tell me if I'm wrong here, being stocked in another version of the stores that they owned.
They had said that the meaning of the day had changed, all the rest of it. But here's the thing, when we're talking about companies making giant profits off the back of the things that Australians desperately need during a time of cost of living crisis where there is less money around. Right now, in November, that's the last month that got reported, gas and other household fuels was up 13%. Not the 4% and a bit that was the overall inflation. Electricity was 10.7%. Any conversations about the profiteering that's happening in those areas? What about the big bad bread and cereal giants who are up 8.3%? What about those evil landlords at 7.1%? This is so my point being, right, which is that I think to a degree, it will be effective for the government to be able to say for multiple weeks, supermarket, point to a bloke whose job it was to implement and then cancel Grocery Watch, a political generation ago, and pretend we've done something when nothing will change. And okay, they might be able to find something to fire out of a gun ahead of a by-election in Victoria to pretend they're doing something about cost of living, like the announcement today. 30,000 homes will have their power bills brought down. Great. But you know what the 30,000 homes were? They were housing commission houses, right?
They're still homes, Paul,
which
and
I'm saying.
Still people.
And as I said, and I recognise that, but that's not moving the dial. That's trying to be seen to move the dial for a broader population who will receive no benefit from that decision.
Well, Paul, I mean, you want to talk about cost of living. This is the whole crazy thing about this government is that they are deliberately making things more expensive with one hand and then turning around and handing people's money back to them. I mean, energy, well, $235, that's gone with the wind. We all know that. That's gone with the wind.
But why is it allowed to go?
But with the energy policies, and also you want to talk about rents. Well, let's pack the joint full of several 100,000 migrants per year. That's going to cause competition. Oh, well, now we'll give some money back, or we'll go after landlords, and we'll go after that. But, it's like easier, I reckon, to just not make things more expensive in the first place, Paul.
Now, I want to talk about something else, which is over the early part of summer, and I know Linda and I often, obviously Linda and I are good friends. Linda and I, we don't like to talk about it publicly, but we always go down to Canberra for summer nats. And it's mostly Linda dragging me along. I'm ripping my top off every time that there's, a car doing a burnout. She's tasteful, keeps it all on, but I'm the one ripping the top off. Spin them up! And it's one of the great bogan events of the world. However, a little bit of trouble this year, and you can work out whether it was the attendees or whether it was the security guards that were responsible. But there was this little statement that came from the federal police person who has some responsibility for the ACT. Now, have a listen to what they said about the people that were coming in not for Floriade, but for summer nats.
It's the moron tourism that we get. I mean, if we set up an IQ testing station at the border instead of a vehicle testing station, we'd probably halve our problems. We're literally just going around playing whack-a-mole. Obviously, we know, we have a fair idea where these events are going to occur, but the behaviour of these drivers, I mean, they just haven't evolved very far. I think they've really plateaued as a species, a subspecies of the human race. I don't know what goes through their mind.
Okay, my simple question is this. How the hell is that okay? Now, I get it, and I get that he got a lot of media run out of it, and everyone likes to point and have a go at the bogans and the hoons and all the rest of it. And again, I'm not going to defend the worst of the behaviour of that crowd, but what public official is allowed to turn around and refer basically to their fellow citizens as subhuman when they're not guilty of crimes against children, they're guilty of back and forth push at summer nats?
Now, I do just want to clarify that we don't go to summer nats together, but I have been to summer nats. It's a great event.
It is great. I love it.
And those burnout competitions are absolutely incredible. Paul's now like, his jaw's on the table, so shocked.
All right, you can pretend we don't go, but we love it.
That's an appalling set of comments. I hope that police officer, there is action taken by his employer, the ACT government. It's absolutely appalling. Nobody, not just public officials, nobody should speak like that. People, of course, should obey the law, and they, by and large, actually absolutely do at summer nats. I'm sure there was some poor example of behaviour, and that's not okay, but it doesn't mean you get to speak about anyone in that way.
And that's my point, which is like, I don't mind colourful chat and a bit of fun and someone trying to say something ever so slightly differently rather than the boring sort of plod behaviour that the media people drum into them. But IQ tests and sort of subhuman and sub-evolved species.
Well, I mean, Paul, I was going to say, when you're talking about Canberra, I'd love to see them set up an IQ testing station at Parliament House and see how they wound up going with that. But I mean, also, you know,
or drug tourism, which is going to be one of their things.
And you know, the ACT party lifestyle, if you don't mind. But you know, the thing too is that, like, we have this problem with a good time in this country. We act like we're this big, fun, larrikin, libertarian kind of country, and of course, anybody has a little too much fun. Oh no, you're doing burnouts in your cars. You're too bogey. You're too hoon. You're too this. You're too that. You know. Oh well, we got to crack down, and we got to have the cops come down on you like a ton of bricks. It's like whenever I go overseas, you always come back to Australia, and you feel like, you know, a bit restricted because you can't sort of go and have, you know, sort of fun times like you can other places. And it's just this mentality, this cop mentality.
Now, can I say one very important point? And I say this respectfully, but
Please.
in the ACT, bogans are actually booners.
So sorry. That's true.
Very important.
Australian is my second language,
and I respect that. So respectfully,
thank you.
we're
And in the
talking
ACT,
about
they
booners.
do love a smoking
education.
ceremony, just not when you're doing it with your car tyres, okay? There's plenty of those that happen in the public service, but none allowed around the showgrounds. Anyway, enjoy some of Nats and, of course, Rocky Nats and all the other ones that are around the country. All right, quick break. Back with more here on Paul Murray Live. Street and Strip magazine. That'll have a big pull-out centrefold, James Morrow, throughout the year. It'll be great to see. Which month do you think you'll be? I think it's, you know, June and July. All right, a quick break. Back with more on Paul Murray Live. Thank you very much for watching. Late debate about 12 minutes away from now. We've got plenty to fire up about here with James Morrow. Of course, you can see him plenty of places here in Sky News. Read him in the Daily Telegraph. And representing local government all the way around the country is none other than Linda Scott. Her specific responsibilities, of course, as an elected councillor in the city of Sydney, which brings me to this story, which is Queen Clover Moore, Lord Mayor of Sydney, has decided to apparently tell a local Liberal councillor that they're not allowed to have a certain flag in their office. What's a certain flag? The flag of the city of Sydney. Now, this flag, it's old school. It has no references to anything other than how things were in Arthur Phillip's day. Delightful Linda Scott, excited in the middle of this Zoom meeting photo, which you've had to see 500 times today. I think it's a Liberal councillor. They decided, officials apparently went in and said, we'll have your flag, please. Do you care whether or not councillors can actually use the flag of the city of Sydney?
Look, this year is a local government election year in a couple of states, including New South Wales, and it is just absolutely time for change at the city of Sydney. The Lord Mayor, Clover Moore, is in her 20th year.
Wow.
She was wearing racist chains for 15 years until I pointed them out. She realised and acknowledged they were racist and has taken them off and put them in a cupboard, but still not done this review of the symbols. But this is a broken promise coming off the back of hundreds and hundreds of broken promises over the years. She's been in some form of elected office since Jimmy Carter was the President of the United States. This is the length
She's had a good run.
we're talking about. And what we have now is a rubbish crisis where we've got maggots, rats, our bins not being collected, you know, basic services not being run properly. Things just absolutely have to change. We have to have a future city with a Lord Mayor that has a bold plan for the future to fix the basic services, to take proper action on climate change, to make the city fun and interesting, not to promise all these, for example, amazing large artworks like the upside down crate. Remember that? And then just cancel them all. It's not been built. The large arch hasn't been built. She's got no major infrastructure projects underway. Sydney Square, she's pushed back for decades, our beating heart right in the centre of the city. You know, it's just time for change at the City of Sydney.
But the interesting thing here is about somebody who has been around too long is that when you are looking at the symbol that is the official symbol of the city, but because it is a colonial symbol, it doesn't feature any Indigenous reference inside the flag, means they don't fly it anymore. But why go around to a bloke's office and say it must come out of the office? That's just stupid.
Well, yeah, it is stupid, and it's just this sort of, you know, American style, let's go and cancel and play Orwell and erase everything from history. Sorry, Sydney was a colonial city. That's how it was founded. If you don't like it, go somewhere else. That's just a simple fact of that. I mean, but I agree with you sort of partially on the city needs an absolute refresh on this. I mean, I'm not sure that the idea that city that cities like Sydney can do something, meaningful to change the temperature. I don't sort of buy that, but I do think that the city has we are going through, as a city, as a country, this incredible amount of change at the moment, and I don't think we have the leadership there to take us through, creating the spaces in the cities and, getting everybody together on the same page about things. I did a lot of reading over the summer. You read about places like Singapore, how they do things, how they did things. Some of the ideas are great. Some of them are horrifying, but, bold vision there, and let's talk about that. You're not advocating
caning people for spitting gum on the ground.
I'm absolutely in favour of that one, Paul. Yeah. It's the car tax I'm against.
Let's be clear, right? Singapore transformed, that incredible area to create this beautiful area that's treed, that even has those artificial trees. It's a global attraction for tourism and creates jobs.
Absolutely.
We have no such plan like that. We need a nightlife in the
That's one thing I just want to... I like a city...
Can you get a bite to eat after 10 o'clock, after 8 p.m? It's like living in an old folks' home.
Melbourne nails this, where you can get into places at 11 o'clock. Brisbane's doing pretty well with it as well. So this is part of being the world-class city, as opposed to one that is kind of, doing that at the moment. But anyway, fingers crossed. Good luck. Later in the year, we'll be talking about it.
I can promise you this. I, unlike the Liberals, will not be wrapping myself in a flag on the front page of the Daily Telegraph. That was just quite bizarre.
No, it'll be the Sydney Star Observer and it'll be a rainbow flag. But now let's talk about Trump and today in Iowa. Again, a lot of people talked about this tonight. I think that just the simple things for people to understand is that the way the process works is that he is so dominant in the Republican Party that, in my view, it's only a court that's going to stop him. Now, in a general election, who knows? Because if Biden's able to turn it into a 12-month carry-on about defending democracy and abortion rights and all of those things that have been able to be successful for Democrats in 20 and 22 and holding on to the Senate, then we'll see what happens. But what's your take on what happened today?
Well, I think, Paul, you're absolutely right, but the thing I would correct you on, it's not democracy, it's defending our democracy. And as soon as you hear, this is a little tell here for everybody out there, this is a tell. As soon as you hear them talking about our democracy, it means they're saying you vote for our candidate or you are beyond the pale.
The democracy is different.
Our democracy, But democracy itself is an idea. They're not so in favor of that because they don't want you to vote for the guy. They want to take him off the ballot, So, but who's practicing fascism? I don't know. You tell me. I did think that the Trump... it was an interesting result. Yes, a big romp home for Trump. Two caveats. Number one, I feel like you got a lot of people who did not vote for Trump and maybe in the never Trump camp, which could hurt him in the general. Like those people who voted for Nikki Haley, it's going to be hard to get them across in a general election. That's one thing. The other thing, too, is just listening to his victory speech, his, speech at the end there was just something, it felt like he dropped back a little bit of a gear. I'm wondering what that's about, whether that was just a one-off or if there's something else bigger happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, well, that's a very good point. My sense is that he's giving sort of, 12 hours to 24 hours for everyone else to jump out and get behind him, and then the nicknames stop, or they start up again and he'll run them off the table. What do you think today as you were sitting back and cheering every one of those 99 counties today, Linda?
Well, look, it is extraordinary, isn't it? But I think the most important thing is that often, actually, even though there's so much written and spoken and read about Iowa, it's often not a predictive state. So it garners a lot of attention and a lot of interest. And of course, particularly with Trump, he's so able to attract bizarre attention because of the outrageous things that he says. But I think that it is often not going to be necessarily a smooth ride for him because of the legal challenges.
He's literally in court tomorrow.
Very, very, very serious legal threats, not only to him being on the ballot, but actually to his own criminal behaviour coming into question. But also, I think that if you were a sensible Republican, surely you'd be wishing for a candidate like Haley. You'd be wishing for a candidate that can
But they're on the ballot, and you can vote for them if you want
to attract middle American voters in the way that Joe Biden can.
That's it. If Nikki Haley was the nominee, she would be the worst thing since sliced bread.
She'd be a fascist.
Mate, remember when binders full of women? Remember that one? About Mitt Romney. All right, I've got to jump. Thank you, guys. Love you both. We'll talk to you again all year. Looking forward to it. Plenty more to say here tonight on Paul Murray Live. That's our show. Got to go. Megan Kelly tomorrow night.